Mercy, Vivian had learned, was never a feeling in pack politics. It was an instrument, offered when it preserved order and withdrawn when grief demanded a body to carry blame. The old songs called justice a balanced scale, but in Frostborn keep the scale tipped toward whoever spoke first with conviction and loud enough rage. By dawn, she understood the crux with brutal clarity. Truth moved slowly, while fear sprinted. A healer could spend years earning trust with steady hands and sleepless nights, and lose it in a single morning if the wrong person cried poison. They dragged her through the shattered court in her healer whites, the hem gray with ash and old snowmelt, wrists chained so tightly the iron ate into skin already cracked from winter tinctures. The court had never been fully repaired after the border raids. Half the eastern wall stood like broken teeth, and wind moved through the gaps with a low, mourning whistle. Three packs crowded the stone tiers above her, cloaks layered against cold, their scents braided into a harsh fog of wet fur, smoke, and anger. No one looked uncertain. That terrified her more than the chains. Luna Maris sat beneath the wolf banner canopy with a blanket over her knees, face pale, eyes rimmed red and hollow. Beside her stood Cain Thornwood, broad-shouldered, immaculate, his grief displayed like polished armor. He held a glass vial between two fingers as if it were sacred proof. "Vivian Frostborn," he said, voice carrying to every corner of the court, "administered this moonroot tincture at moonrise 3 nights past. The Luna bled by dawn. The child was lost before midday." A roar rose from the stone benches. Someone spat near her boots. Someone else shouted, "Blood law, by sunset." Vivian swallowed copper and forced her voice past a throat gone dry. "That vial is not mine." Cain did not look at her. He held the vial higher so the etched wax at the neck caught light. Her seal. Frostborn's spiral branch, impressed in white wax she kept locked in the infirmary chest. "Your mark says otherwise," he replied. "My mark was stolen." This time he turned, eyes narrowed in practiced sorrow. A convenient defense from a desperate woman. She scanned the faces around her and found her aunt near the lower rail, lips pressed thin, gaze fixed deliberately above Vivian's head. Her cousin Bryn stood one step back, avoiding her eyes. That hurt in a way accusation did not. Only family had access to the ledger room. Only family knew where she kept the wax and stamp when she worked late. The realization landed like ice under skin. Someone at her own table had opened the door for this. Luna Maris spoke, voice frayed. "I trusted you." Vivian's knees weakened, but she stayed upright. "Luna, I gave you willow bark and cloud mint for cramping. No wolfsbane, no moonroot concentrate, nothing that could force silence." Cain's command cracked like a whip. "Do not desecrate her mourning with your lies." The crowd answered him with approval. She could feel the mood consolidating, snapping into place. Grief wanted shape. Cain gave it one. He stepped toward the tribunal stone and dropped to one knee with theatrical reverence. "By blood law, I petition execution before sunset, to restore public trust and prevent further contamination of healers' stores." A chorus followed. "Before sunset, before sunset." Vivian tried again, louder. "Check the ledger, Ash. I burn each draft after transcription. There are duplicates in the infirmary oven." The entry order was altered. "You will see." Enough. Elder Rusk, whose hearing was failing but whose pride never had, struck his staff against stone. "The accused will kneel." The enforcers forced her down. Iron bit harder. Her breath came too fast. She tasted the old panic that had lived in her since childhood winters, when storm winds shook the roof beams and no one came when she called. "I survive alone," she told herself, the old refrain, the one that had carried her through neglect and hunger, and the long apprenticeship where praise was rationed like medicine. "I survive alone. I survive." A horn sounded at the outer gate, long and low, heads turned. The court doors opened to a small retinue in travel-worn black and silver. Their banners were new cloth stitched to old poles. Starfall, the pack that had burned 2 years ago and somehow returned with survivors and scar tissue instead of territory. At their center walked Wulfric Starfall. He did not move like a petitioner. He moved like a man who had already paid for every inch of ground he stood on. His cloak was ash dark, one shoulder torn and mended by rough hand, and his gaze swept the court once, weighing exits, guard positions, and distances before it settled on Vivienne. Something in his expression sharpened, not softness, not pity, just immediate attention, predatory and precise. Elder Rusk scowled. State your purpose. Wulfric inclined his head by the smallest degree. Alliance terms, medicine exchange, labor compact for spring rebuilding. I sent notice 3 days ago. Kane stepped forward smoothly. You arrive during tribunal. We can resume diplomacy after justice is served. Wulfric's eyes flicked to the chains at Vivienne's wrists, then to Kane's hand around the vial. Justice first, then. By treaty custom for contested medicine charges crossing pack lines, I invoke trial by oath in neutral territory under my provisional authority at Starfall Hold. Murmurs rippled. Kane's jaw tightened, just once. Elder Rusk barked a laugh. You claim neutral authority while landless. Not landless, Wulfric said. Unfinished. The answer unsettled people because it was true. He had not come to conquer Frostborn. He had come with wagons, carpenters, and an offer the starving border packs needed. Grain routes, medicine routes, work through thaw. The court had tolerated him for that alone. Kane recovered first. A convenient technicality to delay sentence. A legal one, Wulfric replied. Unless Frostborn now rejects interpack oath law in front of 3 witnesses and 2 envoy scribes. 2 scribes in Starfall colors stepped forward and unrolled fresh vellum without being told. Kane's nostrils flared. He could not strike them down without exposing the politics beneath his grief. By the time the sun tilted past the western battlements, argument had hardened into compromise. Execution paused. Transfer granted at moonrise. Vivienne remained chained, for public safety, escorted by Frostborn enforcers and 2 Starfall guards. Kane smiled as if he had yielded graciously, but his scent held iron and calculation. They locked her in a side chamber off the ruined infirmary until the transfer hour. No fire. 1 cracked basin. The chain between wrist cuffs shortened so she could not stretch fully. Through the warped door she heard boots, low voices, and once, unmistakably, Bryn crying. Near dusk, the latch lifted. Bryn slipped inside carrying a folded blanket and a water skin. His eyes were swollen, his mouth trembling. Don't, Vivienne said. Don't do this kindness now and call it love. He set the blanket down anyway. I tried to stop him. Him who? Bryn looked at the floor. Silence answered. She stepped close, chains scraping stone. Did you take my seal? He flinched as if struck. I only opened the ledger room. Kane said he needed to verify entries for the council. He said if I refused, he would expose father's debt and strip us all. I did not know about the vial. Vivi, I swear by moon and marrow, I did not know. The chamber spun. Betrayal had texture, she discovered. Not sharp, but soft and suffocating, like wet wool over the face. You sold me for debt. I thought he wanted an audit. He wants me dead. Bryn reached for her wrist. She pulled back. Outside, a guard barked, 2 minutes. Bryn whispered fast, panic fraying every word. Listen to me. I heard Kane in the lower hall. He told Enforcer Tal to keep transfer clean and make sure the healer does not survive the road if she becomes inconvenient. He said a fall in the ravine would save the council a spectacle. Vivienne stared at him. Why tell me now? Because I am a coward, not a murderer. He shoved something into her bound hands. A thin sliver of bone, sharpened to a crude pick, wrapped in linen. For the cuff hinge, left side is weaker. Then he was gone, and she stood with the tiny tool pressed to her palm while footsteps resumed outside the door. Run now, or die on their road. Decision did not feel heroic. It felt like nausea and calculation and the old instinct to survive one more hour. She dropped to her knees beside the wall where mortar had failed and worked the pick into the cuff seam, heart pounding against iron. Twice it slipped. On the third attempt, the hinge pin shifted a hair. Enough. Voices approached. She shoved the pick into her sleeve, pulled the blanket over her lap, and lowered her head as the door opened. Up, said Tal. They marched her through the infirmary corridor, past shelves stripped bare after the accusation, past jars shattered under evidence review, past the herb-drying racks she had built with her own hands. Thunder rolled far off beyond the keep. She hated thunder. Her lungs tightened. At the broken colonnade near the old rain cistern, a stone gave way beneath her boot. She stumbled hard into Tal's shoulder. He cursed and shoved her toward the outer stair. Careful, he said, with a smile too thin to be kindness. Would be a shame if you fell. There it was. Not rumor. Plan. She let herself sag, pretending dizziness, and when Tal reached to jerk her upright, she drove the loosened cuff edge into his wrist. He shouted. She twisted, tore free of one hand, and ran. Pain exploded up her arm where the other cuff still held, chain whipping her thigh as she bolted down the service stair 2 at a time. Shouts erupted behind her, boots hammered stone. She veered left into the collapsed archive passage, where roof beams leaned like broken ribs, then dropped through a gap into the drainage runnels below the keep. Cold water seized her calves. The tunnel stank of algae and rust. She ran bent double, one hand skimming slick wall, chain clattering against rock loud as a bell. Behind her, voices echoed, closer, then farther as they split at the fork. Check the aqueduct mouth. Take hounds. Lightning flashed at the tunnel exit, turning rain into silver wires. She burst into open night at the ravine edge and nearly slid on wet shale. Wind slapped her hair across her face. Thunder cracked overhead, and panic rose fast and blinding. Breathe. Count. In for 4. Hold. Out for 6. She tried and failed. Tried again. A shadow detached from the pines below the watch ridge, moving uphill with controlled speed. Not hound. Man. Large. Deliberate. She backed away, heel skidding on mud, and the chain around her right wrist yanked her off balance. She pitched forward. A hand caught her forearm before she hit stone. Heat surged through her like silver fire poured straight into bone. Every other scent vanished at once, wiped clean until only cedar, rain, and him remained. The animal part of her went rigid, then rose, urgent and stunned. She looked up and saw amber bleed into his irises, brightening toward molten gold as his breath caught once, and his stance shifted into stillness so lethal the storm itself seemed to pause around it. Wulfric's grip gentled without releasing her. Behind them, enforcers crashed through brush and stopped when they saw who held her. His voice came low, meant only for her. Mine is not possession, healer. It is protection, if you let it be. The words should have steadied her. Instead, they split her cleanly down the middle. One half of Vivian wanted to collapse into the certainty in his voice, into the way he had said protection without claiming ownership of her breath or body. The other half still heard Tal's boots, Kane's sorrow-crafted lies, the court chanting for her death before sunset. Survival had taught her to distrust relief most of all. Relief made people careless. Carelessness got them buried. Tal shoved through the brush, flanked by 2 enforcers with drawn short blades, rain slicking their hair against their foreheads. "Release the prisoner," he barked at Wulfric. "Frostborn custody. Tribunal transfer. Wulfric did not release her forearm. He shifted one step, placing his body between Vivian and the men without abruptness, as if this had always been where he meant to stand. You arranged custody with chains and a ravine, he said. An interesting interpretation of lawful transfer. Tal lifted his chin toward the ridge where more voices echoed. She attacked an officer and fled. She was threatened with a staged fall, Vivian said, and hated that her voice trembled anyway. In your own words, Enforcer Tal. At the stair. Tal's expression hardened, and for one dangerous beat she saw calculation move behind his eyes, the same kind she had seen in Cain when he performed grief for a crowd. If Tal lunged now, the storm and the dark and the ravine would swallow any witness inconvenient enough to die in mud. Wulfric's people appeared from the trees at his back, not with shouted warnings but in disciplined silence, 6 wolves in human form wearing patched black leather and Starfall's silver thread at the collar. Their presence shifted the geometry of the hillside. No one spoke. No one needed to. Tal realized he was outnumbered and, more importantly, observed. Wulfric nodded once to the nearest guard. Call the scribes. A woman with braided gray hair stepped from shadow, carrying oilskin-wrapped vellum even in the rain. She did not look surprised. She looked prepared. Recording begins, she said, voice level. Ravine approach, Frostborn border, moonrise -1 hour. Tal swore under his breath, then straightened into formal posture. The accused remains a danger to public order. The accused has requested neutral process, Wulfric replied. I accepted under oath law in open court. You may accompany us to Starfall Hold and file grievance before witnesses, or you may return to Frostborn and explain why you interfered with a legal transfer while armed beyond escort protocol. Tal's jaw worked. He glanced at Vivian's half-open cuff, at the cut on his own wrist, at the scribe writing every movement. In silence thick as soaked wool, he stepped back. We accompany. Wulfric finally looked down at her, rain tracing his cheekbones, amber still lit with that unnerving inner heat. Can you walk? She almost said yes out of habit and pride. Then thunder rolled across the ravine and her lungs cinched tight again, panic rising like floodwater. Not fast, she managed. Then we do not move fast. He signaled 2 of his guards to take the flanks, not her arms. No one touches her chains except me. The trek to Starfall territory felt endless, even though it could not have been more than an hour. The storm turned trails into dark ribbons of clay, and each step dragged at her boots as if the earth wanted repayment. Pine needles plastered to her skirt. Her free hand shook uncontrollably when lightning split the ridgeline, and each crack of thunder pulled her backward into old winters, old rooms, old helplessness she had spent years disguising as composure. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood and kept moving. Wulfric set the pace beside her without comment, one hand hovering near her elbow but never closing unless she stumbled. Once, when her knees nearly folded on a steep descent, he caught the chain itself, not her wrist, and guided it clear of a root so it would not wrench her shoulder. The choice was so precise it unsettled her more than any overt gentleness could have. He watched for harm the way some men watched for advantage. By the time the trees thinned, the storm had softened to a hard drizzle. Starfall Hold rose from the valley ahead, less fortress than stubborn beginning. Old stone foundations scavenged from burn ruins, new timber walls braced with fresh iron, watchfires burning at 4 corners around a central long hall whose roof was still half scaffolding. Lanterns glowed along mud-packed lanes where workers moved under cloaks, carrying planks, hauling water, mending a world one practical task at a time. No polished banners, no carved throne dais, just survival made visible. The smell hit her first. Not perfume and politics like Frostborn's court, but wet cedar, forge smoke, broth, medicinal alcohol, wool drying by fire. Work sense, human sense, honest fatigue. Her chest tightened for a different reason. At the gate, a massive pair of carved wolf heads flanked the entry arch, both scarred by flame and repaired with dark resin that gleamed like old tears. A young guard with a bandaged hand saw her chains and frowned openly. "This is the healer?" "This is Vivian Frostborn," Wulfric said, voice carrying. "Under my protection and under oath law. Any insult to her is an insult to me. Any injury without tribunal order is treason." The guard's posture snapped straighter. "Understood, Alpha." Alpha. The word moved through the gate crew and nearby workers in a quiet wave, not worshipful, not fearful, but anchored. She had seen packs obey power. This felt different. This felt like people choosing a man because he had stood in ruin with them and not looked away. Inside the hold, Tal and his enforcers were escorted to guest barracks under watch. The scribe disappeared toward the records room. A healer in slate blue approached with a copper bowl and clean cloths, then hesitated at the chains. Wulfric held out his hand for the key Tal had carried. Tal delayed exactly one breath too long. Wulfric took the key anyway. He knelt in front of Vivienne in the middle of the muddy courtyard, unconcerned with rain soaking his cloak, and unlocked the remaining cuff with careful turns so the swollen skin beneath would not tear. When the iron finally fell away, her arm felt weightless and wrong, as if she had forgotten how to hold her own hand. Red welts ringed her wrist. He did not touch them. He looked up and waited. "May I?" he asked. She nodded once, unable to form speech. He took her hand then, very gently, and turned it palm up. The contact slammed through her again. Heat. Pull. A bright thread yanked taut between sternum and spine, and she sucked in air sharply enough to hurt. Around them, conversation in the yard faltered. The world narrowed to his fingers around hers, and the way his pupils thinned, then widened, then thinned again, while amber blazed brighter until gold rimmed the edges like molten metal cooling too slowly. His breath hitched, a single involuntary sound he seemed almost angry at making in public. No one moved. Vivienne could not either. Her awareness fractured into unbearable detail. The roughness of his calluses against the heel of her palm, rain tracking down the side of his throat, the exact cadence of his heartbeat where it thudded through the tendon at his wrist, the scent of cedar and storm and something warmer beneath. Unmistakably male, unmistakably hers, to notice now whether she wanted to or not. The tight knot behind her ribs, clenched for months, loosened one knot width, and then pulled tighter in panic because loosening felt dangerous. What is this? What is happening? I am not safe enough for this. I am not healed enough. Not clean enough. Not anything enough to stand in a courtyard with everyone watching while my body learns someone's name faster than my mind can reject it. This is want braided with terror. And I do not know where one ends and the other begins. If this is fate, it has cruel timing. If this is strategy, it is the most intimate weapon ever forged. If I step toward him and lose him, I break. If I step away and lose this, I break differently. Wulfric rose slowly, still holding her gaze. "Get her to the infirmary wing," he said to the slate blue healer without looking away. "Warm water. Bruise draft. No sedatives unless she requests them. Post 2 guards at the door and 1 at the rear stairs." Tal laughed once, bitter. "You would risk treaty talks over a disgraced female?" That did it. Wulfric turned his head toward Tal with quiet finality that made even the rain seem to hush. "Careful," he said. "The last man who called her that will answer under oath before dawn." Tal looked to his own men for reinforcement and found none. Inside the infirmary, ruin turned sanctuary. Lamplight softened the sharp lines of unfinished stone. Beds had been built from reclaimed doors. Herbs hung in neat bundles above a table scored with knife marks from years of use and reuse. A fire burned low in a stove patched with riveted iron. Vivienne stood at the threshold, swaying, while the slate-blue healer, Mara, she introduced herself, set out linens and a poultice bowl with brisk, competent movements. "We heard what Frostborn said," Mara murmured, rinsing a cloth. "We also heard what Frostborn says when it wants someone buried. Those are not always the same thing." Vivienne let out a laugh that almost became a sob. "That might be the kindest political statement I have ever heard." "Give me an hour and I will make a kinder one." Mara wrung water from the cloth. "Sit." Vivienne sat. She should have collapsed into practical concerns. Evidence, ledgers, Kane's next move, Bryn's confession, the scribe's record of the ravine. Instead, her mind kept circling back to the courtyard and the look on Wulfric's face, the shock there, and the iron discipline layered over it like armor thrown on over skin that had already been cut open. He appeared in the doorway before Mara finished binding her wrist, shoulders filling the frame, wet hair combed back with his fingers, a fresh shirt under an unfastened war cloak. "I need 5 minutes," he said. Mara studied both of them, then nodded and withdrew, closing the door behind her. Silence pressed in. Fire popped once in the stove. Wulfric stopped an arm's length away. "I will not ask you for trust tonight," he said. "Trust is earned in increments, not speeches. I will ask for terms. You tell me what you need to feel safe under my roof, and I will make it law before my council hears sunrise." Vivienne looked up at him and felt that pulling thread again, fierce and uninvited and painfully clear. "No one enters my workroom without written record and 2 witnesses," she said. "All medicine stores are sealed with dual marks, yours and mine. Every grievance against me is heard publicly, with scribes present, not whispered in corridors." Done. If your beta argues politics over process, he argues against your own oath. Something hard flickered across Wulfric's mouth. "Noted." She swallowed. "And if this bond is real, it does not erase consent." His expression changed then, not surprise, not offense, but recognition so direct it nearly stole her breath again. He bared his throat in a wolf gesture of offered vulnerability, deliberate and unmistakable. "Chosen," he said softly, "or nothing." Their eyes locked, and the room fell away to heartbeat and firelight, and the first terrifying outline of a future she had not dared to imagine, standing alive between them. The pull between them held for another breath, taut as wire, until Vivienne forced her fingers to unclench against her skirts and took one careful step back. "Then write it," she said, voice rough but steadying as she used it. "Not only to me, to everyone." Wulfric's gaze did not soften, but it grounded, shifting from raw instinct to decision. "It will be posted at the gate, the hall and the infirmary by the next bell. My seal. My voice." He inclined his head, formal where a different man might have pressed advantage. "Rest if you can. I will place guards outside your door and inside the records room. No one opens either without your word." He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame, and looked back once. "If thunder comes, send for me." She almost refused on principle. Pride rose first, sharp and familiar. Then lightning flashed beyond the shutter and the muscles in her chest tightened on reflex. She gave a single nod. He left without touching her again. The quiet after he was gone felt louder than the storm. Vivienne sat very still on the edge of the narrow infirmary cot, staring at her reddened wrists while the stove clicked and settled. Mara returned with broth, tincture, and dry clothes, and spoke little while she worked, which was the greatest kindness she could have offered. Vivienne drank because she was told to, changed because cold had sunk through to bone, and let herself be wrapped in a coarse wool blanket that smelled faintly of rosemary smoke. When Mara finally dimmed 2 lamps and closed the door, Vivienne stood and crossed to the wash basin. The water had gone lukewarm. She dipped her hands and scrubbed until her skin flushed pink, then red, then tender. Still she felt it. The remembered tack of blood from Tal's wrist where the cuff edge had cut him. The phantom stain of every accusation shouted at her in Frostborn's court, the deeper stain of Maris's grief turned toward her face. She scrubbed harder. It was never enough. I am here in a fortified room, guards outside, law on my side for one precarious night, and still my body behaves as if a door will burst open and hands will drag me back to stone. I am tired in places sleep does not reach. I am angry enough to burn and too afraid to trust the flame. He asked for terms and accepted them without bargaining. He stepped back when the bond pulled us both forward. That should not matter this much. It matters anyway. It matters because restraint is a language I have rarely heard from men with power. And now that I have heard it, I cannot pretend I did not. By the time the night bell marked midnight, rain had thinned to a fine, steady hiss over timber and slate. Vivienne had not slept. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside the stove, ledgers from memory laid out on scrap parchment, trying to reconstruct entry sequences Cain might have altered. Her handwriting wavered each time thunder muttered over the valley. A quiet knock sounded. Not a guard's blunt rap. 2 taps, then stillness. "Come," she said, not trusting her volume. Wulfric entered carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. He had changed into plain black wool, no insignia except the thin silver cord at his wrist that marked his rank among Starfall. His hair was still damp at the nape, as if he had washed quickly and returned before sleep could claim him. "I did not want to wake you," he said. "I was not asleep." "I noticed." He set the bundle on the table and stepped back, leaving space between them. "May I sit?" She gestured to the stool opposite the stove. He sat, forearms braced on his knees, saying nothing while she tried and failed to steady her breathing through the next low roll of thunder. He watched her face, not her mouth, not her throat, reading strain without crowding it. "What do you need from me right now?" he asked. The question disarmed her more effectively than command ever could. "I need my lungs to remember this is weather, not warning." He nodded once. "Battle breath, then. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through pursed lips for 8. Longer exhale tells the body the danger has passed. We repeat until your pulse obeys." She gave him a skeptical look despite herself. "You make panic sound like a disobedient recruit." A corner of his mouth moved, brief and unexpected. Panic does not care about dignity. It does care about oxygen. He counted softly, not touching, not crowding. 4 in, hold. 8 out. Again. Again. On the 5th cycle, the band around her ribs loosened by a narrow, miraculous margin. On the 8th, her hands stopped shaking enough to hold the cup Mara had left. On the 10th, she met his eyes and found no triumph there, no claim, only patient attention. When her breathing steadied, he reached for the bundle and unwrapped it. Inside lay a healer's satchel stitched from heavy black cloak cloth, lined with waxed linen against damp. The seams were uneven in places, hand-done in haste, but reinforced where strain would pull. Along the inside flaps, small labels had been sewn in neat block script. Bitter root, clean needles, fever bark, burn paste, field thread, moon tea. Vivienne stared at it in silence too long for politeness. "I tore my old war cloak in the Eastern Pass 2 winters ago," he said, as if explaining an ordinary procurement order. "Could not discard it. Mara said you were working from borrowed pouches and broken boxes. I had an hour. You made this. I had help with the buckle." His gaze dropped to one crooked seam. "My stitching is better on leather than cloth." She touched the satchel as if it might vanish. The fabric was thick, still carrying a faint trace of cedar and cold air. Kings do not usually sow. I am not crowned. His tone stayed level. And even crowned men should know how to mend what keeps people alive. The tightness behind her sternum shifted into something she did not have a name for yet. Not safety, not fully, not peace. A beginning. Wulfric leaned back slightly, giving the satchel and her reaction room to exist without commentary. I need to ask something in return, he said. She looked up, bracing for strategy. Tomorrow, after council, the Hold's orphans gather in the lower shed for lessons. We have 18 children and 3 adolescents who lost kin in the fires. They know snares, watch roots, and when to run. They do not know enough herbcraft to survive a fever season without fear. Teach them. The request landed so far from manipulation that she almost laughed from sheer surprise. You are negotiating with me for children's lessons. I am asking the best healer in Reach to train the people I am sworn to protect. You have barely known me 2 days. I have watched how you catalog under stress, how you ration without cruelty, how you speak to Mara's apprentices as if they are already capable. Competence is visible. He held her gaze. And if Cain intends to make you a symbol of corruption, then I would rather make you visible in truth before rumor hardens. There it was, the strategic layer beneath the tenderness, but it did not cheapen what came before. It clarified him. He was not kind instead of shrewd. He was kind and shrewd, both on purpose. A hard knock struck the infirmary door. One of the outer guards called through wood. Alpha, Council has convened early. Beta Thornwood requests immediate hearing on treaty optics. Wulfric's expression did not change, but the air in the room sharpened. Tell them I am coming. Bootsteps retreated. He stood, then hesitated. Will you attend? Vivian looked at the satchel in her lap, at the label sewn by rough hands that had no reason to do careful work, and did it anyway. Yes, she said. If they are deciding whether I exist as a person or a liability, I prefer to be in the room. At first light, then. The council chamber at Starfall Hold had once been a granary. The ceiling beams were smoke-dark and scarred, the stone floor still etched with old grain channels now filled and leveled with fresh mortar. A long table of mismatched planks ran down the center, lit by iron braziers and dawn leaking pale through arrow-slit windows. Scribes occupied a side bench with open vellum. Guards lined the walls with ceremonial spears grounded but ready. Cain Thornwood stood near the head of the table as if he had always belonged there, immaculate in charcoal wool with a silver clasp at his throat. He inclined his head to Vivienne when she entered beside Mara, and grief made his face noble enough to fool strangers. Vivienne, he said, I am relieved to see you recovered from your fall. She did not answer. Wulfric entered behind her, and the room rose. Sit, he ordered. Voices began before the benches were fully settled. Councillor Hest from Riverclaw argued that treaty envoys were already whispering about a mated alpha with compromised judgment. A quartermaster worried neighboring packs would interpret Vivienne's protection as admission of guilt hidden by rank. One elder from Ash Hollow, hands shaking with age and old anger, said plainly that no ruler could afford a healer accused of killing an unborn heir, whatever legal nuance wrapped the charge. Cain said little at first, which made his timing more effective when he finally spoke. The issue is not her value as a practitioner, he said, smooth as polished stone. The issue is political liability. The bond, rumored or real, creates an appearance of bias. We are rebuilding from ash. We cannot survive if every verdict appears dictated by desire. He set both palms on the table and looked directly at Wulfric. For the good of Starfall, I propose temporary removal of Vivian Frostborn from the central hold until treaty talks conclude. Quietly, respectfully, a practical measure. The proposal hung in the room like a blade waiting for the right hand. Vivian felt the old script rising around her, the familiar architecture of exile disguised as prudence. Remove her for now. Protect optics. Revisit later. Later never came for women like her. Later was a polite word for disappearance. She rose halfway from the bench. If your process cannot withstand my presence, it cannot withstand Cain's narrative either. Exile does not look neutral. It looks like confirmation. Sit down, muttered Counselor Hest. You are not recognized to speak. A younger enforcer near the rear wall, eyes bloodshot with unresolved grief, spat at the floor near her boots. My sister bled out in Frostborn after taking healer broth. I will not bow to another poisoner under this roof. He moved before anyone issued command, shoulder-dropping as he lunged across the aisle toward Vivienne with a clenched fist. Wulfric was faster. He stepped off the dais in a single stride and caught the enforcer's wrist mid-swing with his left hand, then drove his right forearm across the man's chest to halt momentum without throwing him to stone. The impact thudded through the chamber. Spears lifted. 2 guards surged forward. Stand down, Wulfric snapped, voice cracking like split oak. No blades. The enforcer struggled once, breath ragged. Wulfric held him in place by leverage alone, not striking, not humiliating, only stopping harm with absolute control. You will grieve, Wulfric said, low and lethal, but you will not turn grief into mob law under my roof. He released the man and stepped back, hands open to show restraint. Then he crossed the remaining distance to Vivian and took position at her shoulder where all could see, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers, far enough to leave her space unclaimed. Record this, he said to the scribes. Any insult to my healer is an insult to my crown in exile and will be answered by challenge or law, at my discretion. We do not exile witnesses to make ourselves comfortable. We hear grievance in full daylight. Cain's jaw tightened. You are proving my point. No, Wulfric said. I am disproving yours. He turned to the chamber, voice carrying to each corner. A ruler who cannot separate desire from duty is unfit. Agreed. A council that cannot separate accusation from evidence is equally unfit. Also agreed. Therefore, we proceed by process. Formal grievance hearing at second bell. Open doors. Witness testimony from Frostborn escort, Starfall guards, and recording scribe from the ravine transfer. Medicine stores sealed under dual marks effective now. Mara stood and lifted her chin. I volunteer to hold one seal. So ordered, Wulfric said. He looked to Tal, who sat rigid on the far bench under guard. Enforcer Tal, you will testify under oath regarding transfer conduct. Refusal will be entered as contempt. Tal swallowed and nodded once. For the first time since dawn in Frostborn's ruined court, Vivian felt the room's balance tilt away from panic and toward structure. Not safety yet. Not victory. But structure, the scaffold truth could climb if people were forced to hold still long enough. Cain leaned back in his chair with a thin smile meant for allies rather than her. You gamble heavily, Alpha. Wulfric did not turn toward him. I do not gamble with process. The chamber settled by increments. Spears lowered. The enforcer who had lunged was escorted out to cool his temper, alive and unshamed, which mattered because mercy with witnesses became precedent. Scribes sanded wet ink and copied orders for posting. Mara squeezed Vivian's forearm once in passing, then moved to organize seal wax and lockboxes. Wulfric remained at Vivian's shoulder through all of it, saying nothing for several breaths, while the council reassembled around law instead of noise. Then, just low enough for her alone, he asked, Are you still with me? The question carried no demand, only check and care. Vivian looked at the chamber, at the men who had expected her to disappear politely, at the Alpha who had stood between her and a fist without turning the moment into a slaughter, and felt one more internal wall begin to crumble at the edges. Yes, she said, I think I am. Wulfric gave the smallest nod, then stepped away just far enough to make clear that standing beside her was a choice, not a tether. "Second bell," he said to the room. "We begin." The grievance hearing unfolded with a brutality that wore legal clothes. Tal swore oath with his palm over iron and ash, voice flat at first, then rougher when the scribes asked him to repeat exact phrasing from the ravine stair. He tried to soften it. He said he had warned her about unstable ground. He said the escort route had been standard. Then Mara produced the escort protocol tablet from Starfall Records, and the lane Tal chose had already been marked unsafe after spring washout. Kane requested permission to question the witness and was granted it, his tone all wounded patience. "Enforcer Tal," Kane said, "are you under debt to gambling houses in Frostbourne Lower Market?" Tal froze. "That is not relevant." "It is relevant if your testimony can be purchased." Murmurs flared. Kane paced once, measured and controlled. "Did Vivian Frostbourne strike you and flee custody?" "She cut me while I reached for her chain." "Did she flee?" Tal swallowed. "Yes." Kane turned his palms up toward the council in a gesture of reluctant sorrow. "A frightened accused can still be dangerous. A grieving pack can still require visible accountability. My concern remains unchanged. The Alpha's attachment is clouding risk assessment." Vivian watched him as he spoke and felt, beneath fear, the cold mechanical click of pattern recognition. Kane never denied the ravine threat directly. He redirected. He made every exchange about perception, optics, public trust. He was not trying to prove her guilty now. He was trying to make truth feel politically expensive. When Mara took her oath and testified about missing compounds from the hold's stores, the chamber grew still. Inventory discrepancy appeared after dawn council, Mara said, setting 3 wax tablets on the table. 2 vials wolfsbane distillate, 1 moonroot concentrate, 1 vial dusk thistle resin. Removed from locked cabinet. No break marks. Key access or copied key. Wulfric looked to the quartermaster. "Who holds cabinet keys?" "Chief Healer, Acting Quartermaster, Alpha and Beta." Kane did not blink. "Search my quarters now." The confidence in it made several counselors exhale as if that settled matters. Wulfric gestured to 2 guards. "Do it. Also search mine." Kane inclined his head in solemn approval, then added lightly, "For fairness, search Vivian's room as well. If we are building transparent process, let us build all of it." The request was elegant and poisonous. Refusing would look protective. Agreeing would legitimize suspicion. Vivian met Wulfric's gaze and gave a single, hard nod. "Agree." "Search all 3, Wulfric ordered. "Scribes present for each room." By the time the second bell's echo faded, Kane had achieved what he wanted most. Every corridor in Starfall buzzing with equal uncertainty. The accused Healer, the bonded Alpha, the principled Beta. Competing stories, none settled, all useful to him. At the end of hearing, a runner arrived breathless from the gate tower with sealed notice from 2 neighboring packs. Envoys were already on the road for the Moon Summit and would arrive by nightfall expecting treaty signatures. Kane accepted the message first, scanned it, and lifted his voice before Wulfric could respond. "Then we cannot afford instability. We proceed with ceremony tonight, publicly. If we hide now, rumor writes the terms for us." Wulfric's jaw set. "Tonight, then. Open hall? Full witness? Dual-sealed provisions only." Kane bowed as if conceding to shared wisdom. A prudent compromise. By late afternoon, rain had cleared, leaving the hold scrubbed and raw under a hard silver sky. Vivian stood in the records room with Mara and 2 apprentices, while scribes logged each crate for summit use. Grain wine, spring water casks, ceremonial broth, tea bricks, salt. Every lid received 2 wax marks now, hers and Mara's, pressed side by side. It should have reassured her. Instead, it revealed a deeper breach. 3 cabinet locks showed faint scoring inside the keyway, the kind left by wax impression theft and hurried filing. Mara traced one mark with a nail. Someone practiced this. Not once. Someone with time and confidence they would not be questioned, Vivienne said. A knock sounded at the open frame. Wulfric stood there without escort, sleeves rolled, a ledger under one arm. Gate records from the last 6 weeks. Beta office signed requisition on every night watch rotation touching infirmary stores. Mara's expression went flat. He built the blind spots. Wulfric set the ledger down beside Vivienne, their shoulders nearly brushing as they bent over the same page. Heat pulsed beneath her skin at the proximity, fierce and distracting, but this time she did not flinch away from it. She used it like a handhold and forced her focus to ink. Kane had moved the same 3 sentries between Archive, Healer Cabinet, and West Passage across 7 different nights, always under plausible pretexts: storm prep, envoy quarters, inventory escort. He rehearsed the routes, Vivienne said, not for one theft, for repeated access. Wulfric turned a page and found disbursement lines for rebuilding funds redirected through Thornwood intermediaries. And while he rehearsed, he controlled coin and narrative. The crux settled between them with terrible clarity. Kane did not need her convicted by fact if he could make Wulfric look compromised, isolate command, and trigger emergency censure during treaty season. Then Beta authority would become temporary stabilization, and temporary would calcify into rule. Vivienne pressed both palms to the table, staring at the names of dead laborers whose wages had never reached widows because the ledger columns had been hollowed out and repainted with cleaner numbers. Anger rose hot, then steadied into purpose. "He has one more move tonight," she said. "He always layers them." Wulfric's voice dropped. "Then we strip him of room to move. You stay within my line of sight at Summit. You are trying not to issue an order. I am trying not to cage you." The honesty in it landed low and deep. She lifted her head, and for a breath the room narrowed to his face, the scar at his jaw, the restraint in his posture. "I will stay in sight," she said. "Not because you command it. Because I intend to survive this long enough to testify." His mouth almost curved. "That is very much the woman I have come to know." She let out a short breath that might have become laughter in a less dangerous life. "Your timing for tenderness is inconvenient. My timing for most things is inconvenient." For 30 heartbeats they stood in the exhausted stillness of people who wanted more than they could safely take. Then a horn sounded from the gate, long and formal. Envoys. 3 hours later, moonlight pooled in the long hall rafters while torchlight threw moving gold across a stone. Delegations from River Claw and Ash Hollow stood in ceremonial rows, cloaks clasped, guards posted at respectful distance. The summit table had been expanded with trestles, treaty vellum weighted by carved bone. Kane moved through the crowd like a practiced host, introducing, soothing, calibrating every glance. He wore concern beautifully. Vivienne worked the service station herself with Mara at her side, pouring from sealed kettles into marked cups, checking each scent before it left her hand. Bitter bark, sage, clean steam. Routine steadied her for a while. Wulfric remained near the treaty table, speaking with envoys but keeping her in peripheral range, gaze flicking back every few breaths. Then she reached the final kettle. The wax on its lid held 2 impressions. Hers. Mara's. Intact. She cracked the seal anyway and froze. Under the broth's savory steam rode a metallic sweetness she knew from emergency poisoning drills, faint but unmistakable once named dusk thistle masking agent over wolfsbane microdose. Not enough for immediate death. Enough for collapse, cardiac strain, and panic in a crowded hall. "Mara," she whispered, "do not serve this." Mara leaned in, inhaled, and went white. Moon, save us. Vivian snatched the ladle out and raised her voice. No one drinks. Step back from the table now. Conversations faltered, then fractured into confused noise. Kane turned first, expression snapping from social warmth to outraged alarm with theatrical precision. What are you doing? Poison in the final kettle, Vivienne said. Seal breach by substitution compound. Kane crossed the floor fast, stopping short of her station with both hands visible. You expect this chamber to believe another convenient discovery from the woman already under accusation? He turned to the envoys, projecting grief and restraint. I warned this council that optics and attachment would destroy confidence. And now, at treaty table, she manufactures chaos. I am not manufacturing anything. Then prove it, Kane said sharply. Drink from your own accusation. The challenge was designed perfectly for spectacle. Refuse and look guilty. Accept and risk exactly what he had dosed. Wulfric started toward them, but Kane lifted his voice over him. Alpha, if she is innocent, she should welcome demonstration. Vivian saw the trap, saw also the crowd leaning toward whatever looked decisive. She reached for a testing vial instead. Kane moved. His hand flashed from his sleeve, scattering a pinch of silver-gray powder directly toward the open kettle. Not poison this time. Catalyst. The dust hit steam and ignited a violent white flare that surged up like a struck forge, hissing into choking vapor. People shouted and stumbled back. One envoy nearest the station inhaled and dropped to his knees, coughing hard, cup shattering from his hand. Another clutched the table edge, face draining of color. Assassination! Kane roared. Seize her! Guards lurched forward in confusion, half toward Vivienne, half toward the fallen envoy. Mara dragged one coughing apprentice behind a pillar. Wulfric hit the chaos at a run, shoving a guard aside and reaching for Vivienne through smoke as a second kettle crashed to stone and hissed. Across the hall, someone screamed that the doors were barred. Vivian tasted metal and ash, saw Kane already backing toward the side passage with two loyal enforcers closing around him, and understood with cold precision that this had never been a single poisoning. It was a chamber-wide trigger built to detonate trust, treaty, and command in one breath. The hall tipped toward riot, and the night became critical. Wulfric hit her shoulder and drove her behind an overturned trestle as the white vapor spread low and fast across the flagstones. Coughing ripped through the hall. Torches guttered. Somebody slammed into her from behind, then scrambled away on hands and knees, gagging. Kane's voice rose above the noise, clear and commanding in the exact tone he used for emergency drills. Seal the west doors. No one leaves. Detain the healer and the alpha both. We have attempted regicide in open hall. The lie was almost elegant. It gave frightened guards a script before thought could catch up. Two of his loyal enforcers pivoted at once, shoving the bolt into place and drawing steel. Another kicked the nearest evidence chest under the treaty table, trying to send it skidding into the smoke. Vivian saw him because she had catalogued that chest herself at dusk. Tincture shards from Frostborn, copied ledger strips, and one cloth packet of recovered seal wax impressions from the lock, scoring in the infirmary. Kane was not just escaping, he was erasing sequence. Wulfric rose from cover and roared, Starfall Guard, to me, protect the envoys, no blades unless struck first. He moved like force under discipline, crossing 3 strides to the nearest fallen envoy, hauling him clear of the worst vapor, then shoving a water-soaked cloak into his hands. Breathe through this. Stay low. Kane backed toward the side passage with his 2 men, palms up in counterfeit restraint. Look at him, he called to the chamber. His first instinct is her, not treaty law. This is exactly what I warned you of. Vivian tried to stand and nearly blacked out when the catalyst sting reached her lungs. Mara caught her elbow and pressed a strip of damp linen over her mouth. Dusk thistle carrier, Mara rasped. Not fatal if diluted, Panic is the real killer. Then stop the panic, Vivian said, and heard the answer before she finished speaking. If she let Wulfric fight this as a military breach, Cain would recast every move as mated bias. If she fled, she became confession. If she waited for perfect evidence, Cain would burn the room and call it necessity. The crux was brutal and simple. Only a truth no one could reinterpret would hold. I am afraid. I am shaking. I am still the woman they chained in white and dragged before 3 packs. But fear is not the same as helplessness, and tonight I choose what I am in front of witnesses. I know this right. I know the price. Memory bloom kills liars who call it under false oath because it binds blood to sequence and sequence to moonlight. If I am wrong, I fall in this hall and Cain wins anyway. If I am right, no rank can silence what the room sees with its own eyes. I do not need rescue. I need space, ash, and 1 minute no one steals from me. She tore the linen from her mouth and shouted from the center of her chest, healer command voice honed through winters of triage. Mara, flood the kettles and throw green fennel on the braziers. It will pull the sting from the vapor. Riverclaw envoy, keep your head down and sip water only. No one drinks broth. No one leaves. Heads turned because certainty is louder than fear when it arrives at the right moment. Mara did not hesitate. She kicked 1 kettle over the coals, sent steam roaring, and dumped crushed herb from her apron pouch into each brazier until the air shifted from metal sweet to sharp green. 2 apprentices copied her instantly, coughing eased by increments. Vivian grabbed her new satchel from the service bench, yanked it open with unsteady fingers, and pulled out a vial of cleansing spirit and a packet of moon salt ash. She strode to the treaty table, swept a clear circle through spilled broth and broken cup shards, then sliced her palm on a clean ceremonial knife before anyone could stop her. Blood welled bright and hot. She pressed it to the stone and spoke her name into the ring. By healer oath and witness moon, I invoke memory bloom. Let true touch answer. Cain's composure cracked for the first time. Stop her! 1 enforcer lunged. Wulfric intercepted him with a shoulder strike that sent both men into a pillar but did not break the circle. Vivian dropped the frostborn tincture shards into the blooded ash, then seized the evidence packet with wax impression fragments and snapped it open. Last, she pointed at Cain's hand. Your signet, in the ring, now. He laughed, breathless and furious. You command nothing. Wulfric did not look away from Cain when he said, Give it. For 2 beats, no one moved. Then an elder counselor, pale and sweating, stood and barked at the nearest guard, Disarm him. The guard obeyed, wrenching Cain's right hand down just long enough for Mara to strip the thornwood signet free and toss it into the circle. The ash ignited silver white. Light climbed the smoke in a twisting column and flattened into moving image above the stones. Not illusion, but memory rendered with ruthless clarity. Cain in Frostborn Infirmary after midnight. Gloves on, opening Vivian's seal box. Cain heating wax, pressing her mark to forged vials. Cain tipping measured wolfsbane into Luna Maris's moonroot under lamplight. Cain switching ledger strips while Bryn stood in the doorway, stricken and silent. Cain in the lower hall telling Tal to keep transfer clean and make sure the healer did not survive the road if she became inconvenient. The hall went utterly still except for the hiss of braziers. Cain snarled and flung a second handful of silver dust toward the circle, this time mixed with spark grit meant to burst and blind. Vivienne saw the arc and reacted on training older than fear. She slammed both bleeding hands to stone and drove her will through the right line, not to heal, but to hold. A translucent barrier surged up around the nearest benches, curved like blown glass, catching the dust in a crackling spray that burst harmlessly against its surface. Envoys flinched, but were untouched. The shield trembled, then steadied. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Someone whispered, "Goddess witness." By the time the third alarm bell rang from the gate tower, Kane had stopped pretending. He ripped free of the guard on his left, shoulders bunching as claws punched through his fingertips in partial shift, and sprinted for the side passage. Wulfric vaulted the treaty bench and gave chase. Vivienne swayed once from blood loss, bit down hard, then snatched a tin of binding salve from her satchel and ran after them, Mara shouting for her to stop. The pursuit spilled into the moonlit courtyard, mud slick under boots, workers and guards flattening back against walls as Kane barreled toward the main gate. He was fast in partial shift, faster than any full human stride, but panic made him linear. Wulfric cut angle instead of distance, met him at the gate arch, and drove him sideways into the carved wolf post with a bone-rattling impact. Kane slashed. Wulfric trapped the wrist and twisted, forcing him off balance without tearing him apart. Done. Wulfric said through clenched teeth, "Do not make me finish this by force." Kane spat at his boots and shoved free with a feral snarl, turning to bolt again. Vivienne crossed the last yards and flung the binding salve straight into the slash on Kane's forearm, where Wulfric's grip had opened skin. The paste hit blood, flashed dull blue, and locked. Kane took one more step, then his leg buckled. He crashed to one knee in the gate mud, claws retracting in jerks as paralysis climbed. Pack members poured into the courtyard, then envoys, then council, all of them just in time to see Kane pinned by truth and chemistry, not rumor. He lifted his head toward Wulfric, hatred burning through the remnants of control. "You would trade a kingdom for a disgraced female." Vivienne stepped forward before Wulfric answered, voice cutting clean across the crowd. "You traded your bloodline for power and called it duty." Silence answered her, then a low murmur of assent that spread pack by pack. Wulfric crouched in front of Kane, took the beta rank sigil at his throat between thumb and forefinger, and tore it free. "You were my beta," he said, each word iron, past tense. He stood and turned to the full assembly. Recorded by witness and right projection, Kane Thornwood is convicted of treason, attempted assassination of envoys, falsification of healer records, theft of stores, and conspiracy to murder under transfer oath. Sentence under pack law: exile brand, public confession, permanent ban from command, and forfeiture of all ledgers and holdings to restitution funds for the harmed. Kane lunged on instinct despite the salve. His body failed him. He sagged, breathing hard, eyes wild and disbelieving as two guards secured his arms and hauled him upright. "I built your survival," he hissed at Wulfric. "You will lose everything without me." Wulfric's expression did not shift. "No, we nearly lost everything because of you." He gestured to the scribes already writing at speed beside the gate. "Read the stolen ledger lines aloud, everyone, tonight." Under moonlight and torch fire, with 3 packs listening and no corridor left for spin, the first scribe began to read Kane's thefts and orders into the night, and his power ended where everyone could see it. The second scribe followed with inventory lines, naming each missing vial, each diverted coin mark, each forged requisition signed under beta authority. Mara stepped forward when called and identified the compounds by scent and residue. Tal, face ash pale, confirmed the ravine route had been chosen against protocol and admitted his debt had made him easy to use. Bryn was brought from Frostborn under guard before the final bell and, shaking so hard he could barely stand, swore to what he had seen in the ledger room. He did not ask Vivienne for forgiveness again. He only told the truth and kept his eyes on the stone. Kane was marked for exile at the gatepost he had nearly reached. The brand was brief, lawful, and witnessed. No one looked away, because this time witnessing was part of justice, not spectacle. Elder Rusk, summoned by envoy record and forced to hear the full reading, stood rigid through the confession and announced Frostborn would submit Luna Maris's remaining medicine stores for independent analysis at sunrise. He said it like swallowing thorns. It was still said. A sealed scribe addendum entered after the hearing recorded Councillor Hest's written request for formal censure against his own vote to remove Vivienne, with instruction that the archive preserve it unedited. A second addendum recorded that the enforcer who had lunged in council accepted 2 months of watch duty at the orphan ward for breach of hall order. When the readings ended, Wulfric ordered every physical exhibit logged and sealed in the new tribunal chest: the tincture shards, Kane's signet, the stolen wax impressions, the scored locks, Tal's escort tablet, Frostborn transfer record, and the cloth packet containing Vivienne's recovered seal. Nothing vanished into private rooms. Nothing relied on memory alone. Mara took one key. Wulfric took the other. The chest was set in plain sight beside the hall hearth until dawn. Only then did the crowd begin to thin. The old execution circle lay beyond the long hall, where broken stones had once framed public sentence, and now held moonlight like water in a basin. Vivienne stood at its edge with her bandaged palm throbbing, and the night finally quiet enough for her own pulse to sound loud again. Smoke from spent torches drifted through pine. Somewhere downslope, a child laughed in brief, exhausted relief before being hushed toward bed. The world had not ended. It had changed shape. Wulfric approached without escort, cloak unfastened, throat bare above his collar. He stopped 1 pace from her and waited until she met his eyes. "There is one question left," he said. She knew. The bond had been a live wire between them since the ravine, harder to ignore with every shared decision, every restraint chosen in public when possession would have been easier theater. Now it pressed steady and undeniable, not a shove, not a command, but a door held open. He spoke carefully, each word placed. "Vivienne Frostborn, do you want this bond completed tonight?" She searched him for pressure and found none. "Yes." He did not move yet. "Do you choose me without debt, without fear of what council wants, without owing me for protection?" Her breath caught, then settled. "Yes, I choose you." His jaw eased by a fraction. "Do you understand that once marked, I am yours as fully as you are mine? Not above, not owner, partner, mate." The last word resonated through her like a struck bell. "I understand. And yes." Only then did he step into the circle. He unpinned the thin silver rank cord from his wrist and laid it on the center stone between them like an offering, then lifted his chin and bared the line of his throat, exposing the vulnerable pulse no alpha offered lightly. "Your turn to ask," he said, voice low. She swallowed against sudden emotion and managed steadiness. "Wulfric Starfall, do you choose me when rumor is loud and peace is expensive?" "I do." "Will you hear me when I disagree with you in council?" A breath that almost became a smile. "I will probably dislike it and still do it." "Will you stand beside me, not in front of me, when this hold calls us to lead?" His gaze sharpened with something fierce and tender at once. "Always." She stepped closer until the heat of him met her skin through wool and linen. "Then I choose you, mine." His eyes closed for one heartbeat, as if the word landed somewhere old and wounded and finally reached. "Yours," he whispered. He cupped her jaw with one hand and gave her every chance to pull away. She leaned in instead, exposing the curve where neck met shoulder. His breath warmed her skin first, a grounding pause. Then his bite came controlled and precise. Pain bright as flint. Immediate, clean, and deep enough to matter. She gripped his forearm hard enough to bruise. The pain peaked, then shifted, heat unfurling outward in waves that loosened every locked place in her chest and spine. Not numbness, not erasure, recognition. The bond surged through nerve and marrow, carrying scent, heartbeat, fragments of feeling. His relief, his awe, the hard-won discipline he had held for days and finally set down with her consent. He released at once, palm pressed over the mark in soothing pressure while he murmured against her skin, "Breathe with me. Stay here. You are safe. You are with me." She breathed. The night sharpened. She could feel him now not as intrusion, but as presence threaded alongside her own pulse, steady and warm. When she opened her eyes, she took his wrist, turned it, and looked up for final permission. He nodded. "Yes, mate." She bit deliberately into the inside of his wrist where the pulse beat strongest, not as retaliation, not as symbol only, but as claim returned in full. He hissed once through his teeth and bowed his head, letting her set the mark without flinching away. Warmth flooded back through the bond, doubled this time, and she felt his control tilt into surrender and trust. His emotions touched hers in clear currents, protectiveness without cage, devotion without demand, hunger braided with reverence. She drew back, thumb brushing the mark she had made. "Mine," she said, voice shaking with wonder and certainty. He touched the mark at her neck with equal care. "Mine." Then, together, forehead to forehead in the center of the old killing ground remade by choice, they said, "Mate." The bond settled not as blaze but as deep, steady thrum, like a hearth finally catching after a long cold season. He gathered her into his arms and she went, no longer bracing for impact. They stood there for several minutes saying nothing, simply learning the new shape of breath and heartbeat shared. When thunder rolled faintly beyond the mountains, she tensed on instinct. His hand stroked once down her back, and the tension passed. By dawn, the hold had transformed ceremony into structure. In the rebuilt long hall, with envoys present and scribes recording every word, Wulfric announced the Starfall Healers Tribunal as standing law. All medical accusations required open hearing, dual evidence custody, and rotating oversight from 3 packs. Mara was appointed first tribunal warden. The orphan ward was moved from storage sheds into the south courtyard, where Vivian selected plots for feverfew, mint, and wound leaf, while children trailed her with spades too large for their hands and determined expressions that made her laugh despite herself. Vivienne's recovered seal was not returned to private lock. At her request, it was melted in a small iron ladle before witnesses and recast with a second ring, Starfall's wolf over Frostborn's branch, so no healer's mark would ever again stand unverified and alone. The old scored locks were mounted on the records room wall as permanent proof of how theft had entered. The repaired wolf head gateposts were renamed Witness Gate, and every new envoy passed beneath them after reading the posted law. Frostborn's formal response arrived before the midday meal. Luna Maris had received the analysis record, confirmed delayed wolfsbane exposure in her surviving stores, and removed 2 household stewards tied to Kane's payments. Elder Rusk accepted external audit under seal. It was not penance. It was accountability beginning, and Vivian took it. At sunset, the packs gathered again, not for sentence, but for vow feast. Wulfric and Vivian stood on the same stone level, no dais between them. He named her Luna Healer of Starfall Hold, with full authority over medicine law, orphan wards, and restorative accords with neighboring packs. She named him her chosen alpha before all witnesses and bound the pledge with shared cup and joined hands, the marks at neck and wrist visible in torchlight. Bryn requested service assignment in the outer herb fields under supervision. Vivian granted it with terms, not absolution. Tal was stripped of rank and placed on restitution labor under Mara's logistics roster. Kane was escorted beyond the northern markers by neutral guard at first light the next day. His confession record was completed under witness, and his command severance was entered permanently into pack rolls. When the feast thinned and music gave way to quieter voices, children wove between herb beds lit by hanging lanterns, arguing about whose mint row would root first. Vivian stood in the garden she had planted on ground once used to shame her, dirt under her nails, moon above the rafters, and felt belonging settle into her bones as something earned and real. Wulfric came to her side and linked his fingers through hers. Not above, not ahead, beside. She leaned into him, smiling as the bond hummed warm and sure. Yours, she whispered. His answer brushed her temple like a vow renewed. Mine, mate.